Hello and welcome to this episode of Beat Teacher Burnout. Today we're going to be talking about ethical leadership, about a workload charter, and we're going to be talking to Sam, who is a MAT leader and whose staff say that we love the fact that we are listened to. So Sam, before further ado, welcome, and why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Hi, Rowena. Thanks, and thanks for having me. So, my name is Sam Gibbs. I am the lead for curriculum and development at the Greater Manchester Education Trust. We are a MAT of 5 now, as of last week, schools in the Greater Manchester area, and all through trust now from nursery to post 16. My background is English teaching, so I taught and led in English departments in Leeds for about 12 years, and then since that time had a range of roles in teacher, professional development, and as I say now leading that work across my multi-academy trust.
Amazing. And Sam, I'm just going to ask, I noticed that you've got a blurred background for your video today. Can you just tell everyone why? Because it's so funny.
Yes, I will apologise for this. So it's interesting we're talking about burnout, because there's burnout at work and then there's stress and burnout in your personal life in the middle of a massive kitchen renovation. So unfortunately my kitchen is currently in the dining room, which is where I'm sat. I won't tell you what's behind the blur, but it wouldn't be suitable for this podcast.
Let's just go with the cereal boxes, shall we?
Cereal boxes, for sure.
But actually, that's a really good point, because the official definition of burnout is entirely work-related stuff. But I think everybody who I've spoken to on this podcast and the teachers I speak to and leaders, they all say if stuff's going on at home, it's absolutely going to contribute to the general feeling of overwhelm that we have. And I think your experience absolutely backs that up.
And I think the other sort of part of that is when there's other things going on in your life that are difficult, if you are somebody who gets a lot of validation, a lot of joy, a lot of purpose from your work, like I do, the easy thing to do is to overwork, because it's a safer space or a place where you can almost hide from everything else. And then that can lead to burnout as well. Even if you're really enjoying what you're doing and you're doing some of it out of hours and willingly, it can lead to some of the same results, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with it. And that was me, because I burnt out when I loved my job and I was working way too many hours, but I was seeing an impact from what I did. And life was tough sometimes. So yeah, it completely discombobulated everything. But I want to ask you, really, can you tell us about a time where you have experienced significant stress and the impact at the time and the sort of knock on for you now?
Yeah, I think it sort of crept up on me and then exploded. So a lot, going back to my sort of full-time teaching career, around sort of maybe 9 or 10 years in, I'd had 3 children along the way. So that's tricky in itself, navigating how you balance teaching with family commitments and things like that. And I, towards the end of my full-time teaching career, ended up working in a school as part of a secondment from the multi-academy trust that I was working in at the time. And it was a really tough school. And it was a broken school, and it was just becoming more broken. It was one of those stuck schools that had been sort of stuck in an Ofsted category for a long time. And we know the impact that has on communities, on staff. And after I'd been there for a few months, a new leadership team was sent in to sort of, help to improve the school. And there was just a total mismatch of the brokenness of that school and the approach of that leadership team. There was no nurture, there was no care, there was no listening, there was no understanding. There was just, we have an approach and you're going to use it, and it didn't land well. I think for me at that point in my career, I'd been working so hard for a long time, and I think there are some things here that are specific to when you've got family and caring responsibilities, that you balance that continual guilt of not doing either thing properly and then trying to overcompensate in all sorts of ways. And so although I loved teaching, it's always meant everything to me. I wanted to be a good mother as well, and that point in my life this happened. How that was approached, how that leadership team behaved in some ways that affected lots of people and really affected me personally, but then became a sort of trigger, I suppose, where I couldn't continue in that way. And it was made very difficult for me to stay. And I think that often happens, in schools when teams like this come in. the much easier thing to do is to clear the decks and start again. That's the easy thing. But what you lose then, of course, is sight of what's best for the children and the community, and the impact on individuals is lost, or not cared about. So essentially, there was a day where it sort of all got on top of me, and I walked out of the school and got in my car and drove away and didn't go back, and was signed off with stress immediately. And as somebody who would never, thankfully experienced anything like that in my life, not really struggled with my mental health. I thought I was managing, and I thought I had it sort of all under control. And then it just hit me. And that was a really sort of hard time in my life. It was quite a dark time in lots of ways, and it bled into lots of my relationships, my feelings of self-worth, my feelings of being a good mother to my children. It was a very humiliating experience, and I had been proud, I think, of my teaching career and the impact I thought I'd had, and it kind of imploded at that point, and I didn't really expect it to. It kind of just suddenly hit me.
Yeah, there's something that really triggers in me there, because I remember when I burnt out, and the guilt and the shame and the feelings of humiliation, letting my team down, letting my family down, feeling such a failure. How did you come back from that?
So suddenly I was faced with a period of time where, I was signed off initially for 2 weeks, and then it went back and became longer, and it was coming towards the summer. So I knew I wasn't going to go back. I know I couldn't go back. And all the time I was being sent these threatening letters through the post of, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I hadn't done anything wrong. It was clearly targeted, and it wasn't just me. But I suddenly had all this time. So I kind of woke up the next morning. I was like, what am I going to do today? When you fill your days with work. So I guess I made myself a little routine. So I'm lucky I live near a really lovely park in Leeds. And I was like, okay, every morning I'm going to get up, I'm going to take my kids to school, and then I'm going to go to the park, and I'm going to go for a run or a walk for a period of time. So I knew, I didn't want to, but I knew in my head the right things to do. I need to have fresh air. I need to have exercise. I need to have a structure to my day. Otherwise I'm going to go mad. And that, I was able to sort of carry on like that for a bit. I was still in communication with, people from the school who were, and actually a couple of them, unfortunately, have been put in a similar position. I made really good friends at that school who we were really emotionally able to support each other, and still do actually now. So I was able to really lean on them. I started looking for another job sort of quite quickly, and I was super lucky that it didn't take that long, but it was a job outside of teaching, working in teacher development. When I started that job in, I think it was the August of that year. It was around April, May that this happened. And it only was sort of 6 weeks where I felt like I was out of a job. So once that was confirmed and you know where you're going, it then becomes sort of easier to manage. I'm glad that happened quickly, because I think what would have happened is it would have eroded my self-confidence more and more and more over time. I was able to, when I started that job, meet a group of people who unfortunately had similar experiences. It was a job, it attracted ex-teachers, and it was such a healing experience. Those people, I hope they know the impact that had on me, because by coming together, it validated what happened to me. And we just had the most joyous time the next kind of 3 years working together. And I was able to go and work with lots of schools across the country, but not in the capacity where I was so close to it, because I felt I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have taken a job back in a school in that way. But I felt I was able to still really connect with leaders and teachers. So I had that healing period. And then eventually, sort of after 3 years, I felt I'm ready now to be back in a school situation. And I'd felt I had such opportunities to develop my learning, my skills, my expertise. So when I was ready in terms of my skill set, and I was ready emotionally, and then came into this MAT where I work now, where I've just been so lucky that the people that I work with and for are similarly minded, and that's been really healing as well. But what I'm able to do now is to use that experience to shape the work that I do. And that's been part of the healing for me, but hopefully part of the impact that we can have as an organisation as well.
Yeah, I really want to talk about that next. I've just got one question, and you don't have to answer this, but it's a piece of work I've been doing a lot on myself since I burnt out and had to leave teaching. Is for so many of us, our identity is so tied up in our role. And I think it's largely because it is a passion, it is a vocation, and we love it, and we see the difference we make in the lives of the pupils every day, and as a leader in our colleagues as well. How do you manage that I guess, when you stopped and went off with stress and then had to change jobs, and you said, if you hadn't found a job quite quickly, would that have undermined your sort of sense of worth and identity? How can we, as school educators, how can we manage to make sure that our identity isn't entirely tied up in our role?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that, and I think that's a piece of work I probably need to do on myself as well. And it is a never-ending job, and for me, it's about boundaries. I'm not saying I'm very, very good at them, but it's at recognizing, I'm the sort of person where even over the summer, I think it's amazing. I'll get a chance to loads of reading that I've not had a chance to do. And then I'll just automatically fall to all the education books that I've not had time to read. And actually what I need to be is, no, I need to not do that. I need to read some other stuff. So how do we separate identity? I don't think I know. I don't think I know the answer really to that question. It's about boundaries. I think it's where the role of organisations like mine come in, because I think we have to be really clear that we help to set those boundaries. So around things like workload, which is what we're trying to do. Around things like, because for me, people are always at kind of different stages of their life. There's been times in my life when I've been able to devote a lot of time and energy to my work. And at the moment, that's one of them. My children are older. But when they were younger, I couldn't, and I shouldn't have. What would have probably aided me more then to help me to separate these two identities is being clearer for my employers what those boundaries were. So things like, when do we send emails and not send them? What is the expectation around engaging in professional learning and development? And what does that look like? I think one of the things we tried to do in our trust is to look at things from the perspective of a full-time teacher and kind of go, is this manageable for them? Somebody who's got kids and goes home and the washing machine's on the blink and they haven't had a chance to have the haircut in 6 weeks, or take the car for an MOT, and sort of look at it through that lens. So I think it's about boundaries, but it's not easy.
So I think that's really right. Yeah, boundaries is something I'm still learning about because I just don't think I had them. Now, so in terms of your workload charter, what has that looked like, and how have you managed to get staff saying to you, "We feel listened to"? What's that all about?
So there's kind of two caveats to this. And the first is, we're a really new trust. So we're only in our third year, and it's only in the last 18 months we've really started this piece of work really meaningfully. So I'll talk about seeds of impact. I'm not going to say all the 700 or so people in our organisation say they feel they're being listened to, because I'm sure a lot of them don't yet, but hopefully they will. But we do take feedback a lot from staff, and these are some of the early things we are starting to see. And there was that comment in particular that came through last week, which I loved, where a member of staff said, I feel like the trust is listening and we're moving in the right direction. What I need to do now is find out, hopefully, that that's indicative of what lots of staff are feeling. And I'm getting that sense, but there's obviously more work to do. The second caveat is, in anything you do, you're standing on the shoulders of giants and people that have done it before and have done it with huge humility and professional generosity. So the workload charter originally came from, we didn't invent that term or come up with it, but we did, in the early days of forming, we drew a lot on the work of the Education Alliance, which is a trust around Yorkshire and around East Yorkshire, and the CEO there, Johnny Utley, we connected with him really early on, went over to visit. They published their workload charter. He's written about it in his book, Putting Staff First, that he co-authored with John Thompson. That the idea was theirs. And we went, that's amazing. What a great thing to do. What we didn't do was carbon copy it and go, we're just going to have the same workload charter that Teal have got, because that wouldn't suit what we need in our organisation. So we did a listening exercise led by the CEO, who's worked with different groups of staff across the organisation, and sat down with them and said, what are the pinch points for your workload? What do we need to do? So it wasn't that we all sat in a room and went, let's write a workload policy, everybody needs to adhere to it. It was, let's co-create it together. And that is really the way we work in our trust. It takes longer, but it's more meaningful and it's more sustainable. So that charter has been created from representative groups of staff across the organisation, and it's resourced in things like, we could have made the assumption, and we probably did early on, that we would say to staff, we don't email after 5 o'clock. But actually one of our teachers in one of our schools said, well, that's no good, because I want to leave at 3, pick up my kids, go home and get my laptop out later, and I want to email. So what we've agreed together is, at the bottom of our email signatures, we'll all have this line that says, I'm emailing you at this time because it works for me, but it might not work for you, so don't worry about responding. So it's things like that I think, that's actually a really good point. There's other things on there, again, it looks very, very different to the workload charter that we originally looked at from Teal, but so it should, because our staff are different, our contexts are different. But I think that's one of the things I've led some of those staff to say, I've really enjoyed being involved in that piece of work to create that charter. I feel like we own it. I feel like it's ours, and I feel like it speaks to it, and we will review it, regularly to make sure it's still working and having impact. Otherwise, there's no point of a charter. It's just something that's laminated. And everyone goes, that looks nice, but it's not doing anything. Yeah.
So what else is in the charter, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, there's a whole load of stuff. So we've got it split into sort of split into sections. So there's stuff around emails, there's stuff around meetings and meeting times, and what's, all of this is, and we've done this with the unions as well. That's kind of really important to say. There's stuff around how leaders sort of manage workload and behaviours around that. And we've actually produced a whole series of charters, so they're all sort of really interconnected, because there's no point saying, this is how we manage workload, but then you go and see your senior leader and say, can I have time off to go to my kid's sports day? And then you're given short shrift. So actually it's really interconnected with how do we expect leaders to behave fairly and consistently when they speak to staff about workload and things like that. But I'm really happy to share our charter, and perhaps you can include it in the show notes, just as an example, and I'm happy to speak to anybody about how we've done that. Marking is another one. So that's generated, that's always the big one. That's generated a whole piece of work through our digital strategy lead around how we're going to use AI and Copilot and things that she knows more about than me to help support some of that work. And we've there's things that have come out of that about how we manage marking. So it's a kind of commitment, as a charter should be. It's an entitlement for staff, but it's also a signpost to us of what staff are asking us to do and what's needed. And it's helped us to identify it is marking at the minute. And even though we say to staff, we don't expect written marking, it's not quite happening as consistently, and we need to look at it. But it's not for any malintent from leaders. It's because nobody knows how to lighten that load. So what it's saying to us is we need to find some ways as a trust. And AI and digital technology seems to be a really purposeful path to follow. And that's what we're going to start looking at this year. And again, we'll involve staff in that. Is it working? Is it reducing your workload? If it isn't, we need to find some other way. So the charter is our commitment, but it's also the beginning of a dialogue with staff. That's how we see it.
Yeah, I love that. It really is a working document, and it's live, so it's going to develop, and that's fantastic, because there's nothing static in a school, is there? It just doesn't work that way. Thank you for sharing that. We will put that in the show notes. Ethical leadership. What do you mean by that?
So just caveat this again. So a lot of these ideas came from, again, our some early work we did with the Education Alliance, and they have a charter which I think is quite widely known about in the sector and has been published. So that was our kind of starting point. We actually refer to ours as ethical behaviours as opposed to ethical leadership. But I think some early discussions we had was how, as a new trust, there's a real opportunity to create culture with intentionality. And that's been really exciting. So, I was the first person in this role. My CEO was the first CEO we've had. So it's what kind of culture do we want and how we're going to create it? And we were really, really inspired by the ethical leadership stuff that was going on at Teal at the time. So we went away and we had our own discussions about, we're clear what work we want to do, but how are we going to do it and how are we going to behave? And so again, we've done a similar listening exercise with staff to kind of go, well, here are our trust values: excellence, care and respect. So we really went for the care and respect. What does that mean? What that look like? If everyone was behaving to each other in line with those values, what does it mean? And we've codified them. So we did the work initially with trustees, the central team and the head teachers, and we broke all that down. We did some work with Apple as well at the same time around what's our North Star and our purpose as a trust. And we came up with our kind of mission statement, which is together we create lives of opportunity. And we've really picked up on what we mean by the word together and what it means to work collaboratively and with togetherness. So again, we've got a charter that's codified in different areas. We've spelt out how we expect leaders to behave. That's now become about how we expect everybody in the organisation to behave, and it's become our code of conduct that's baked into the work that we do. So even when we do, when I deliver professional development sessions across the trust or work with staff to do that, we always start off by contracting around our values, and this is what they look like in this session. So there's things on there, because I think you can do everything in the world around professional development and all sorts of other stuff and school improvement. And you can say that you are a trust where care and respect is important, but that can be undermined by a conversation with a leader in a corridor where you feel that you've been judged or you've not been treated fairly. So I think we see those behaviours are the lever to drive improvement in our schools. So again, this is something I'm really happy to share. It really speaks to our context because it's something that our staff have developed. The piece of work now is holding each other to account for it. So you can have it on paper, but what does a meeting look like where people behave like that? What do interactions look like on a daily basis? And crucially, what happens when people are not behaving in those ways, and what are you willing to do about it? Because one or two people behaving unethically can undermine the culture for everybody else. So that's it's a reasonably new piece of work, but what we're looking at now is how we're working with head teachers to really make sure that they're really clear what that looks like, and then how they're driving that within their school. So it's a longer game, it's not going to happen overnight, but to me it's that intentionality that's really important.
Yeah, and that's the message that's coming through, that you started off saying this is in seed form and it's growing, and actually that's a very powerful message to your staff. We're trying to get this right, but we're going to do this in collaboration and we will improve over time. And I love that, because your staff are going to change and you're going to change, and the pupils, they never stay the same, do they?
No, they don't. And I think for me, that's the link between the two things that we've been discussing, I suppose, my sort of personal experiences and where I'm at now in terms of how I think about leadership. You shouldn't have to go through an awful experience like I did to work out what you think about leadership. But I suppose it's just when it does happen to you, how can you use it? And I will never forget how I was made to feel. Who is it that says that famous phrase that people will forget what you say, but they won't forget how you made them feel? And I spent 12 years in the classroom. I don't teach currently. I did up until last year, but I don't at the moment. But I will never forget, everything I do is grounded in being a classroom teacher. And unfortunately, towards the end, how it felt to be led in that way. And it is impossible to let go of all of that. Like I was saying to you before we started, driving near that school where that happened to me is really difficult for me, and I still live in that area. It doesn't take much to reconnect back to how I was made to feel. So what's really clear to me is I don't want anyone in our organisation to ever have to feel like that, and neither, as human beings. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen? You can't just assume that. You can't just say, oh yeah, we behave ethically and everybody knows what that means. You've got to be really clear what that means and what it doesn't mean. So our charter includes, this is what we expect of anybody that works in our organisation, but also this is what it doesn't look like, and where, mitigating against some of those more unhealthy behaviours, I suppose. But yeah, I guess I feel I've been able to use my experiences to think more thoughtfully about leadership, and that's what I'm trying to do, so it becomes something I can use positively, not something that sort of drags me down, I suppose.
Yeah, and I've been doing a lot of research recently on the power of reflection and how we need to reflect on, as leaders and teachers, actually, well, everybody, but particularly in the school environment, the impact of, as we reflect, then we grow and we change things, and it develops. But also the power of the relationships, because if we don't have those relationships, then it's all going to fall apart, and the trust and the respect. And as we finish, Sam, would you just share with people that meeting you had when the team came in and the head called you into the office, and the first thing that they said, and the impact that's had on you?
Yes, I hadn't met the new head. We'd been told they were coming in, and it was a Friday, and I was in my classroom on PPA doing some marking, probably about half an hour away from my next class coming in, my A-level class. And she popped her head round the door, didn't introduce herself, and she just said, "Are you Sam? Can I have a word?" Okay, so I followed her to her office. She sort of walked slightly ahead of me. I sat down. She had a huge projector screen in her office, and it had a spreadsheet on it. And she said, "That's your year 11 class." I said, "Yes." She said, "Are they going to get those results that you projected?" It had all my data on. I said, "Well, I hope so, because we've just done mocks and I think I've marked them okay." I'm hoping so. She went, "Well, you better hope so, because people's mortgages depend on that." And then summoned me to leave. That was my first interaction with her. And it went steadily downhill from there. So for me, that phrase, "Can I have a word?" I find hugely triggering. My CEO knows not to say that to me, particularly not on a Friday. because I hate it. And that is a clear thing. If I ask to have a meeting with somebody, I want to speak to somebody, I tell them what it's about. I would never put, a meeting in someone's diary and say, I need to talk to you, because even though I think I'm approachable and, try to be kind and all the rest of it, I have to remember I'm in a position, in a trust as a leader, where for some people that's, somebody from the trust wants to speak to me about something, or somebody who's hierarchically higher than I am in the organization. I can't just assume that they're going to think, oh, Sam, she's nice. So I'd really love to talk to you about this. Could we have a chat? It's those kind of things, rather than sending somebody home for the weekend, worrying all weekend because you want to have a word with them on Monday. But yeah, also, the first time we meet people and the impression we set and how we sell ourselves as a leader matters. is what that taught me.
I guess I wanted to finish on that, because you are very relational and approachable and collaborative in your approach, and it feels like that's why your staff are saying, even if they're starting to say, but they are saying that we feel listened to. And where I speak to groups of staff, they're saying, we want to be trusted, but we need to trust our leaders as well. And there's so much about building those relationships. So I think sometimes when you hear the horror stories and the fact that, all these years later, you're still triggered by, can I have a word? It shows the power of our words to people where there isn't relationship, especially, but even where there is. So, Sam, thank you so much for taking all this time and for being so vulnerable, actually. If people want to find out more about you, where would they go?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I think we should talk about these things as well, because it might help others. It might have helped me at the time as well. So yeah, really happy to talk to anybody about this or kind of anything else, really. So I'm on Blue Sky. I am on LinkedIn. So they're the main social media platforms that I use. But I'm also happy to share my work email if anybody wants to talk about anything to do with professional development or charters or trust improvement or anything like that. Okay. And you can share those in the show notes.
Thank you. I will put all that in the show notes. I would also say that I do have a newsletter. So do go onto my website and subscribe to that, because then you get the first version of the podcast when it comes out, and all the notes are very clearly put in there, and then that's in your email. So thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, Sam, for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you took something of value from today. If you want to connect, I'm at rowenahicks.com. or I have a Facebook group, which is Preventing Teacher Burnout. So I look forward to connecting to you at one of those.